There is no late item, Mr. Mayor.
All right.
You bet. And we are really happy to be here. So it was we come here annually to present our budget. And in your package, you'll see there's multiple slides. I'm not going to spend a lot of time speaking to them. They're more or less there for your information. So I'm just going to get started here. Again, first slide is just a synopsis of what we do. Effectively, we're the landlord for the Kimberley Health Centre. And, who are we? We're a small volunteer board. Happy to say that we're a little bit bigger than last year. So we have 5 now, actually now 6. And of course, we have Councillor McBain as part of our board. Thank you. And we employ a part-time facility manager and a custodian. So moving along. Oh, and a contract bookkeeper. There's a brief timeline there, and that was actually in your package last year. The only thing that's changed in that is the very last box, and you'll see that there's now a line item there about new investment needed. That was thanks to doing a building condition assessment in 2023, where the engineer's lens was that it will take about $4.8 million to recapitalize the building at this time. Moving on, again, this is a bit of a repeat from the slide deck last year. And all to say here that the health center is the home of Kimberley's primary care network. And one of the changes that occurred this year was that, or last year, is that we lost Life Labs and the pharmacy. And as a result of that, Interior Health is actually able to increase the space it has for the primary care network. So those renovations are happening this year. So that's a good thing for our primary care network. Okay, and then moving on. So I've already touched on a few things that happened in 2023. One thing I just want to point out here is the investment opportunities analysis. So we did do a bit of a deep dive, I think for the first time in a long time in the history of the organization. Really looking at our organizational form and structure, the building occupancy and different use scenarios. And so as a result of that, we now have a strategic plan, business plan, and a basic capital plan, which good to have that sort of baseline, guidance now for our board and for our organization. I think everything else I've already touched on more or less in terms of changes. There is, we have a couple of tenants that have expanded spaces as well. So Interior Health and EcoFish. Okay, moving on. Just a slide of our current tenants. And then I'll just speak a little bit more about the investment opportunities analysis findings. Some of these things may be interesting to you. So we did interview 23 stakeholders. I think many on council were part of that interview process as well. All of our tenants, as well as other sort of health interested stakeholders and community economic development interested stakeholders. And, key takeaways from that process. We learned that our current lease rates are competitive. There's a lot of different ideas out there for the potential use of the third floor, which is currently unoccupied. We also recognize the status quo is maintaining the status quo right now is insufficient to recapitalize the building. So we will need funding from elsewhere to get that third floor leasable. And I think the other big realization, because of the society relying on volunteers to manage the center, there's inherent risk there in terms of the nature of the operation. So moving on. So I'm just going to set up here for the budget conversation. And so one of the things I did was put together the budget trends over the last 3 years, which was a little bit eye-opening to say the least. But I don't suspect any of these trends are going to be a surprise to you as city councillors. You're also pretty up and close and personal with the costs of doing business these days. But yeah, so you can see overall over the last 3 years, our revenues are up about 48%, but our expenses are also up by 82%. And I see that I'm not sure if your slide is cut off in terms of the items that the 17%, there we go, 29%. Yeah. So you can see the spread there in terms of, where our increased costs are coming from. And I think with that, I'm going to hand over the mic to Kent to carry on and present our budget.
Great. There you go. That didn't take long. Yes, so if I will just briefly touch on a few points with the budget, and then we'll open things up to questions, and we can ask about the previous slides or the budget slides, whichever you like. So we have in your package a single copy of just this year's budget, but for the slideshow, we put together a bit more comparison with previous years. This is the revenue part of our budget, and as Ingrid pointed out with that previous slide, our revenue has climbed considerably over the last few years. This year, the big events were we lost a couple of our major tenants, the laboratory and the pharmacy. But at the same time, we had a major expansion and IH is taking over that area, and Ecofish down in the lower floor is also expanded. So when we look at the revenues there, our major sources of revenues are interior health lease revenue and other lease revenue. And we get not a slight decline probably in other lease revenue because of losing 2 tenants and having 1 tenant expand somewhat, but we also get a considerable amount of expansion from IH. So that's going to bump up that side of the ledger. Last year, we had an incredible year for getting grants, and that was all about our strategic planning initiative and getting the funding for that. This year, we have a more modest projection of what our grants will be, and you'll be seeing one of those when you do the READY grants, because we're putting an application in there. We'd really like to get the Ktunaxin Basket Tribal Child and Family Services Society into the building, but we need to renovate a space for them. So if you can help us with that, that would be great. So the bottom line, we're budgeting for 463,285, which is not much more than our actual last year, but we're pretty conservative when we budget. And we can now go down to expenses, I guess. The next slide. So there's a bit more to this, and I'm not going to go through it all, but I would say that one of the reasons that our expenses have increased over the last 4 years, as our revenue has, is of course because of inflation, but also because the more space you have occupied, the more custodial you need, the more lighting, the more heating, etc. But another major factor is we're putting a lot more money back into the building. So if you look at the column of expenses, just above the green box, there's improvements in projects, which we budgeted 40,000 for last year. We're budgeting 50,000 this year for it. If we go down to where the first blue box is, there's maintenance, contract maintenance, supplies and services. We're putting another 55,000 in from there. So that's about $105,000 going back into the building to fix things, improve things, do small projects. That's over 3 times what we were putting in back in 2021. And we're doing it because we can now. We have more money, we have more revenue, but it's showing up down at the very bottom of this slide, if you could scroll up a little bit, that we still are, as Jack Ratcliffe always said, almost a break-even operation. So if you look at the bottom, first look at other expenses. So our accountants have give us an amortization factor. This is sort of the depreciation on the building. Without that depreciation, with that depreciation, we are $39,000 in the hole. If we took that out of there, we'd actually have made a bit of money this year. So, but we do have to account for that. So things are getting better. If you look at what the column to the bottom line, last number is 39,493 is our budgeted deficit with amortization. That's $10,000 less than what we budgeted last year, 2 columns over. And our actual last year was considerably better than what we had budgeted. So cross our fingers, we may actually not see brackets around that number down there next year, but we'll see. Many things can happen. It is, after all, only a budget.
Looks like a big snow year could have an impact.
Yeah, anything could have an impact. You bet. One of the reasons on the previous slide, 2 slides ago, that our taxes went up over 100% was because a BC assessment decided to completely change the way they assessed our building. They went to a whole new way of doing that. And that was the major impact on the taxes that we pay. We don't pay taxes on the IH occupied areas, but we do pay taxes on the for-profit businesses that are in the center. The not-for-profits apply to the city for an exemption, and you've been kind enough to grant it so far. So,
What is that number? The tax number, Kent?
it should be right there. 36,000 it'll be
okay.
this year, we're
36K.
projecting.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. I missed
Yeah.
that.
All right. Any questions for Ingrid or myself?
All right, thanks for the presentation. Councillor Royer, go ahead.
Just for my own curiosity, what is your deductible in your insurance policy?
We just went through this.
Yes, please.
I don't have that number off the top of my head.
Thanks, Ingrid.
Next year. Next year.
Go ahead,
Happy to
Councillor McGuire.
Email it to you if you're really interested.
Yeah, I just had a question on the new roof interest expense. I'm just curious how long that loan, or what the loan payments are, how long it will take to pay that off.
It was a 10-year loan that was given to the society through the city. I'm not entirely sure when that comes up.
Yeah. We did a 20-year projection for the business plan, and it runs out in a few years. My expectation is always that you'll have another loan by then, because there's a lot of investment needed in the building. So yeah, I'm not looking forward to any kind of holiday from interest expenses, because I think we have to keep putting money into the building.
So that loan that was at least 5 years in,
Yeah, I think so.
5 or 6 years?
The roof was done in 2017.
There you
Okay.
go. So
Yeah.
even more than it.
Yeah, 7 years. Further, Councillor McGuire?
Yeah, I just had a question on the revenue side as well, the amortization of deferred capital and the dividend revenue. I'm just curious what those 2 line items are.
According to our bookkeeper, the amortization of deferred capital is an accounting mechanism to spread out the initial investment that was made back when the clinic and IH moved into the building, and a bunch of work was done on the main floor. And because there was a very large investment, but it was going to be utilized over a long period of time. So it has no cash effect on our budget. We don't see that money. It's just an accounting thing.
And then is the dividend revenue, is that something to do with cash in the bank or?
No, actually, we can't get into that because we are co-owners of Garden View Village. When that village was built, the city owned the land, and as part of the deal to swap the land, an arrangement was made whereby we became a 21% stakeholder in the building, and basically they view our contribution as a shareholder loan, and each year we get some revenue from that, but there's no way to predict how much. So last year we got 9,348, but our accountant maintains that we have to, we got actually 28,625, but there's no guarantee they'll do that. It depends on what they declare the dividend to be and what they declare as a repayment of our shareholder loan. And so we could conceivably get nothing, or we could get a lot. It's very strange. Jack Ratcliffe shook his head a few times about that.
Thanks.
So that would probably depend on the profitability of Garden View year over
I
year.
guess, yeah. Yeah.
Councillor Cairns.
Thank you. I'm just looking at the purposes of the society and managing, operating the Kimberley Health Centre, facilitating establishment of a range of health-related services in the Kimberley Health Centre that meet identified health needs of the community. And you're doing this as a volunteer board of directors, and I just really appreciate the work that you do. So thank you so much. And I wondered, is it a struggle to find volunteers for the board, or how is that? How's the stability and kind of what term do people commit for? Do you feel like that's fairly fragile, or is it solid?
I won't say it's smooth sailing. I've probably interviewed, 10 people who are interested. And when they find out what we do, they're less interested, right? It's just not a super glamorous sort of operation that we run, if you will. We're effectively, we're nonprofit landlords. However, the folks who do find us to be interesting become great board members. I think that's the bottom line. And we're currently we are looking. we have a couple of board members who I think have served a good tour of duty and are looking to move on. And yeah, we definitely are looking for folks who would be willing to step in. It's a really important and valuable part of our community.
Further?
Thank you. I just, so we'll work on spreading the word.
We appreciate that very much. And we are also actively looking as well. So, yeah.
Further, council? All right, just one comment, Ingrid and Kent. Congratulations on being able to get the non-IH related lease revenue kind of at that mode, because losing those two tenants, that was such a big deal. And to be able to come out of that at a wash while increasing IH, that was really, really well done. Yeah, very well done.
And I would just add at this point, in terms of leasable space, we basically have one space left. That's it. Like it's a small 270 square foot space. And after that, we are at capacity.
So you mentioned the city of Kimberley as a tenant. You'll have to excuse my ignorance, but what is that?
Storage.
Oh,
There's some storage rental. Yeah.
Not exactly a tenant, but I was wondering what that was.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks very much for this, guys. Really appreciate it. Nicely done.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Okay, next up, we have a zoning amendment proposed for 331 Ritchie Street. And the motion on the floor is that council decline to consider the requested zoning map and text amendments and direct staff to work with the applicant to modify the proposal to align with the existing C1 zoning. Do I have a mover for this? Councillor Royer, thank you. Councillor McBain seconds. All right, discussion. Troy, take it away.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, just by way of an overview here, so this is property 331 Ritchie Street. It's just kind of in behind the commercial block fronting Warren Avenue, just across the lane. There's a small lot that's adjacent to some residential zone parcels on the remainder of the block to the east there. So the owners there currently use that as just basically a parking lot and storage lot that they are proposing. Would like to develop the property to create kind of 3 detached dwelling units that can be used interchangeably for residential, long-term residential use or short-term rental tourist accommodation use. There's various reasons why that doesn't fit with the existing C1 commercial zone, which is generally our most, our most flexible zone in terms of the wide range of development options allowed in the C1 zone. And both of those, the long-term residential or the short-term tourist rental can be permissible in that zone, but just not in the configuration that's being proposed. So it does trigger the requirement for a rezoning of some sort. One of the other challenges there is that currently there's just no existing zone anywhere that allows for that specific development concept. There's one option is a site-specific rezone and a custom-made zone just for that, or we can look at an existing zone that's maybe fits a bit more closely, but still requires some modification. And that's what had been identified here is the potential to rezone to the downtown mixed-use zone 2. Does offer a little bit more flexibility for the residential and the tourist accommodation use, but it still doesn't quite fully meet, so would require some additional text amendments there. So, and in sort of communicating with the proponents there about that, we were kind of encouraging them to, try to modify their proposal and make it work under the existing C1 zoning. That's, not, they're, I guess, just not interested in that. Granted, there's takes some more design work and some other challenges there, but they want to proceed with that, or proceed with some form of rezoning there. So, so that's part of why this is here tonight. But we're suggesting that a nudge from council to decline to consider the request would help to push the project in a direction that can be made to work under the current zoning. Maybe I'll stop at that and anticipate there's probably some questions.
Go ahead, Councillor McBain.
Thanks, Troy. I was just kind of curious, just looking through this the other day. So I assume, it sounds here like Ariane had all the concerns laid out to the proponent. And it sounds like there was at least some attempt to try to, get to a compromise. And so now it's coming to us. Is this kind of just an appeal to council?
Yeah, in a sense. I mean, at the staff level, we can't refuse an application, right? So if someone makes it a proposal and requires rezoning, we'll try to review those options and maybe try to recommend that they take a different approach or take a certain approach that doesn't require rezoning or maybe is an easier path for whatever reason. But ultimately, if they demand to be heard by council, that's I guess their request. And essentially that's where we're at, is they're demanding that their zoning proposal be considered.
Further,
go ahead.
Yeah, so further to that, I kind of take the view of similarly to the stance that I had when we had our more contentious issue down in Marysville. To me, it seems like I'm trying to avoid one-offs. I really don't like to see, specific amendments just for one particular thing because somebody has a certain idea in their head. There's reasons that we have zoning. There's continuity reasons. There's all kinds of reasons. I love the fact that somebody's interested in this. This is fantastic. And I really hope that we can work towards a consensus. But, that's part of the challenge, and that's part of the art form of design and development too, as having some goalposts that you're working within and trying to make something work within that, not just, what you think is a great idea. Not that I'm saying this is a bad idea. But since we have those zones in place, I really just don't like the idea of a one-off. So just wanted to make that comment.
Thanks, Councillor McBain. Councillor Royer, go ahead.
I mean, I thought we were going to encourage rentals and short-term, long-term rentals with bylaw 2722. I mean, I'm not seeing a problem with this. Are there any other places in Kimberley that would consider something like this in the future? Troy.
Yeah. Well, like I said earlier, there's no existing zones or zoning rules that fit specifically their proposal. So to do what they want to do is going to require some kind of zoning amendment. And I also just a correction there to kind of the first part of your comment and question was the amendments that were done under bylaw 2722 and a couple of years ago was all about creating more options for housing in a few residential zones and this C1 commercial zone as well. So, but it did not expand, and it was not an objective of that exercise to expand options for short-term rental. Yeah.
So, continuing with my question, they're doing both short-term and long-term. Are you concerned about that retaining wall on Ritchie Street? Is that part of the problem that you're seeing? Or you want like a 2 units instead of a 3 unit? Is that what you're suggesting down the road?
Yeah, I mean, no, the retaining or need for retaining or any I mean, there is a steep frontage at the front of the property to Ritchie Street. I mean, whatever happens on the site, they're going to have to deal with that. It's not, I mean, I don't think it's a significant concern in our minds that's a reason to kind of object to anything happening there. But depending on what is specifically proposed moving forward, that may factor in to more significant scale than other aspects of the proposal, I guess. But that's not the key reason for sure.
Appreciate that.
So I've got a couple of questions, Troy, and a clarification actually. So the modification to align with the C1, did I see in the staff report that what that basically means is rather than having the design of 3 independent buildings, we're talking about a single building with multiple units in it? Is that the alignment that we're talking about, or could you just clarify that?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably more than one path forward under the current C1 zoning. One of them is to combine into one multi-unit building. Certainly, that's permissible to have a 3 or more unit multi-unit residential building. The mix of the sort of the desire to sort of interchange between short-term rental and long-term rental is a bit of a challenge under either zone. Those uses are allowable in each zone, but not so much on an easily interchange mix though. So I guess to answer your question, combining them into one building definitely is an easier way to get going. It does resolve some of the building code concerns as well, which maybe seems a little not obvious, but there's some specifics there that can be a more helpful approach for it. So, that's one of the aspects there. Sort of conversely, with the proposed rezoning, like I said, there's a bit more flexibility under the downtown mixed use zone, but again, allowing the 3 or more separate detached buildings is going to require some text amendment there as well. There's kind of a cap in that zone for the number of short-term rental units. So that's another modification. And of course, one of the things that happens there is then that, if those changes are proposed and subsequently approved by council or eventually approved by council, then they would apply to other DMU2 properties as well, which again, isn't necessarily,
Saw that.
I guess it's just sort of
Yeah.
unknown impacts, but at the same time, again, it's a very unique proposal, and it's a it is a bit challenging to wrap your head around. But like I said, we and perhaps even just sort of the alternative of just kind of deferring decision, and some of the feedback and comments from council might be helpful feedback for the applicant as well. And maybe we can try to figure out just how that might work if there's an indication from council that you'd like to see them work under the existing zoning.
Yeah, I guess if looking at what the concept is, I can see why they would not want to have a single building with multiples. I mean, there's a specific concept that they're trying to, put in. I assume that the C1 zoning, the commercial zoning on this lot is kind of a legacy thing, because this is on a residential street, basically. Yeah, it's in behind Warren Avenue, but it fronts onto a residential street. Is there an option here to look at something other than a commercial zone?
Yeah, and I think like that's part of why we're looking at the DMU2 zone, is it is that kind of hybrid. When it was created, it was intended to be that kind of, around the periphery of the commercial zone, perhaps mixed in deeper into this commercial zone, or maybe it's near more deeper into the residential side of things. But again, we just didn't contemplate this kind of proposal, I guess, at the time. So so it's just not included in that at this point, I guess. But yeah, back to your question. I don't know the full history off the top of my head about how long it's been zoned commercially, but it is, for quite some time. It is, like you said, like the next adjacent property, not separated by a lane or road or anything, is residential, as is the rest of that block. And that's one of the things I think that's been discussed is, and like I said, even in the current zoning, if it was just for long-term residential use, it could probably be made to work. Again, if they combine it, and that sort of picking one of those uses might be one of the easier paths forward. Might still require rezoning depending on the configuration and everything, but yeah, it's a bit of a puzzle, this one. So.
Go ahead, Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I note that the gentleman or the proponent has named this a tiny home plan. And I just wondered whether or not we have actually gone about the business of creating a tiny home concept inside of our zoning policy. Have we gone that far yet? And if we haven't, should we, Troy?
Yeah, I'll just start by, the answer to that depends a lot on any individual's definition of tiny home. So for many, many years before the term was even popular, we've allowed small homes, small detached homes as a detached accessory unit in a residential backyard, specifically in our R2 zone. That was an amendment made, I think, as far back as 2010, where we opened up the options to allow for detached accessory units, and they could be as small as you wish to make, basically. One of the key things there is that it's on a foundation, on a permanent foundation, and connected to utilities. What very often is, many people's definition of a tiny home means it's built on a trailer or on some movable structure. And that just, frankly, you just can't be, it's not a dwelling under zoning, it's not a dwelling under building code. So we can't issue a permit for it to call it a home, I guess, or call it a dwelling unit. So by our definitions and zoning and everything else, like, that's essentially, they're just building themselves an RV or something, right? So but it's not a dwelling unit, it's not a home by that definition, right? So so there's many opportunities since the bylaw 2722 amendments. There's many more opportunities now to build those small detached units, or slightly larger, whatever. There's lots of flexibility there for in terms of size, but it has to be, regardless of size, it needs to be on a foundation, it needs to be connected to utilities.
Yeah, which I think is what the plan is. It's basically a micro home. I don't like the term tiny home either.
I agree. It's probably a much better term. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think there's any question that sending this back for further consultation with the proponent. It's the right thing to do. Does anybody have any, Kevin, is that your hand up?
Yes, sir.
Okay, go ahead.
I kind of see, there we go. Thanks, buddy. I kind of see both sides of the fence here, I guess, in a way that, densification is the new key word and trying to get as many homes in a small space as we can. I like the fact that it's separate buildings, but I wonder about maybe instead of 3, it being 2, and that it's a split of commercial and residential. And the fact that then there's some green space in between to allow for water and trees and stuff like that, just to make it a little bit more appealing rather than just being a big block. So I guess I kind of, Jason spoke about our other zoning issue we had there. Don't really want to go down that road ever again, but if there was some way that they wanted to come back with a change to meet that, and if we could make it multi-use, I think it would be kind of feather in the hat and bring a little bit more business to that area of town as well.
Councilor McBain.
Yeah, I think kind of going off of your point, Mr. Mayor, I think, now it's come to council. I mean, everybody's got a chance to speak, but I think now, the proponents heard from us, there's some concerns clearly that we have, but I don't see anything here that, if everybody puts their heads together, can't be rectified. So to me, that's a good thing. This is good feedback. There's always back and forth. And like I said, that's part of the art form of design. So I would support what you kind of semi-proposed there, Mr. Mayor, and having this go back and just try to reach a compromise. But I know other people wanted to speak.
I'll try to keep it brief. Just a couple questions. Like one question, really, what specifically doesn't comply with any existing zoning? Is it that there's 3 buildings? Is it that there's too small? Like what specifically are we running up against that doesn't fit within any of our current zones?
It's, I guess, a couple layers of the specific use provisions and the fact that they're individual buildings proposed.
If it were 2 buildings and the short term versus long term part was dealt with, then it would comply, or is that what I'm understanding? Because 3 is too many. I'm just trying to.
Yeah.
I didn't read through every single
You're coming up
zone.
with some questions I didn't anticipate.
Yeah. I didn't read through every single zone in preparation for the meeting.
Like I said, one example that's an easy path forward that's quite clear in the regulation is 3 or more units within one single building, and committed to long-term residential use. Like they could have a building permit quite well, a development permit and building permit probably pretty quick. There's lots of flexibility in the zone to make that happen. There's flexibility to allow for a mixed use building. So a commercial unit at the front of the building on the main floor, with residential above or something, right? That's very common elsewhere in the commercial zone. So like I said, the C1 zone has a whole wide variety of options available to them. It's just that this unique proposal they come up doesn't easily fit in there. So it's a bit of a square peg and round.
So the motion on the floor already basically says go back. And I think the message from council is encouraging to both the proponent and to staff is figure out a way how to get to yes. And we'll leave that in your capable hands. All those in favor? Motion is, any opposed? Motion is carried. All right, next up, we have the small scale multi-unit housing directions report. And the motion on the floor is that council direct staff to draft zoning amendments that would apply greater density options consistently to all service parcels across the restricted zones, and allowing up to 6 parcel dwellings on a parcel to comply with the provincial legislation for small scale multi-unit housing. And a reminder that the deadline to make that happen is June the 30th, not ours, but the provincial government's. Can I have a motion? Councillor Royer, thank you. Seconder, Councillor Roberts, thank you. Discussion.
Yes.
Good report.
Uh,
Pretty clear. So you want to give us the summary?
Yeah, I'll try. And I think that we had a good suggestion that some maps might be helpful to kind of just explain our overall intent. Not intending to kind of get into necessarily kind of, you know, parcel by parcel or area by area kind of discussion, but consistent with the options that we've recommended here or identified, sorry, and we are recommending one of them, of course. But just let me start with just try to quickly recap what we're being tasked to do here. So with new provincial legislation, we're required to all municipalities and local governments in BC are required to modify their zoning so that any parcels that are presently zoned and restricted to kind of single unit dwelling use only or even duplex dwelling unit only is required to be modified to allow you know, subject to some certain criteria, at least 3 or 4 units on a parcel. And that's again, it's not to say that they can only build 3 or 4 units, but they have to at least have the option and the flexibility to choose, you know, whether it's going to be 1, 2, or 3 or 4 units. As we spoke previously in the meeting here, and council will recall the wide scale amendments that we did under bylaw 2722 and a couple of years ago that did basically very similar task. In fact, so we were kind of working ahead, I guess, of what the province was, you know, unbeknownst to us at the time. But council did rezone a few or amended the zoning specific to a few zones, but that did apply quite widely through the community. So, so that more specifically was the R1, R2, and R3 zones, but also the C1 zone, where there's a series of amendments that were applicable there. But I guess most significantly, the R2 zone was modified. Previously, it was kind of any combination of 2 units was allowable in the R2 zone, and with council's changes that were adopted in 2022, you know, up to 6 principal units are permissible on any parcel, again, subject to other development requirements, building permit requirements to make sure that they work and everything. But and so we've prepared, just referencing the screen here. Apologies, we didn't get this into the report package earlier, but so this is just intended to kind of show the you know, how much area is subject to the new R2 zoning, or, well, I mean, we didn't change anything. It was the same R2 zone before, but just we've increased the housing options within the R2 zone. So it applies to a very wide area of the community. Just going through the new requirements from the province, there's some criteria to be met where what they've identified as restricted zones. So again, those are the zones, other zones in our community and others that are limited to single unit dwellings only, or you know, anything less than 2 or more. So next slide there, please, Maurice. So what we're intending to show here on the next slide is, again, the R2 zone there is in yellow, and that's any combination of up to 6 units permissible on a parcel right now. And the kind of turquoisey green parcels are the other restricted zones. So zones that by the criteria in the new legislation, we have to make some further changes to our zoning to bring those up to those requirements. So it's a bit ironic that you know, we did those changes earlier and applied to most of the residential areas in the community. And now these new requirements, even though it's way more zones that are involved, it's much less area, much less parcels. So that being said, with the green areas, and I mentioned that it's minimum 3 or 4 units based on the legislation. Again, a parcel owner can still choose to do, you know, 1 or 2 units, but they will have the option to do at least 3 or 4. In Kimberly's case, it's actually by far the majority of all of those parcels in green there are a minimum of up to 4 units allowable. The minimum 3 is really a matter of parcel size. It's quite a small parcel size of 280 square meters or less. And there's really only, I think it's 3 or 4 parcels within that green color on the map that falls in that. So that's kind of our base recommendation, I guess, is that all of those green parcels be allowed to do. Well, it's not our recommendation, that's the base requirement, but we would just suggest that we just make them all the same, even though those smaller parcels maybe wouldn't be required that way. But again, what we're recommending here is is the option that we just apply kind of the R2 zoning consistently across all of those areas, so that there's some consistency that way in terms of the wide range of housing options. Excuse me. Of course, there's still some drafting of that zoning stuff to happen there, but effectively those parcels would be rezoned, and that new zoning applied that would create that wide range of options. Again, I just want to repeat that any parcel there would have the option to if it's an empty vacant parcel, they have the option to choose 1 to 6 units basically. Again, the other thing, some people are, and certainly we've heard from others communities and some folks in our community, like they're concerned about those range of options being available. But I think one thing to be understood is it's not going to apply quickly to every parcel. It's going to take a long time for some of that transition of use. Maybe perhaps clearly some of the older developed properties home property owners might take advantage of those options. What we're seeing already is obviously people, liking the option to add a suite or, add secondary units of whatever type. Certainly in some of the newer, more recent developments where the R2 zone is there, like they're starting to take advantage and making sure they do a duplex or 3-unit building, whatever may be the case there. So it's not a, I think we were hoping there'd be a lot more applications for those multiple unit housing, but in fact it's been relatively slow uptake on that. Some of those other amendments did apply to some other parcels, and we're definitely seeing some of those projects move ahead, which is great. But that's where I think the nature here is that we're setting the stage to allow for consistency of options throughout the community, and that way it works pretty well. I guess it's the second option under the response options, and again, just next slide there. This is where we had identified as kind of a hybrid approach to looking at this. In the legislation that doesn't, in part of the legislations that apply elsewhere in the province, they've put in some what they call transit-oriented area zoning requirements. So if they're in proximity to major transit stops and in those larger centers, there's substantial new requirements under that zoning. But part of what we're trying to demonstrate here, so what's added to the slide there is this kind of blue, what we call a walk shed buffer. And so that's, we've used our GIS system to identify kind of the current transit, the key route, the transit, like the defines bus stops on the commuter service route, combined with the maintained active transportation network. And what we actually used from that is our council's or the city's snow priority plan that identifies which pathways and kind of pedestrian routes are priority snow clearing. And then it also has like key community amenities or facilities like the schools, the commercial nodes, the recreation centers, those kinds of facilities. So the areas there that fall within that kind of blue buffer area are all what we call the walk shed area. So they're all within 400 meters of one of those facilities, part of that active transportation network and the transit route, where it just trying to demonstrate to show how kind of easily connected the community is. And so what we would, if there's some desire to not allow up to 6 units on every parcel like we're recommending, we would suggest that at least those areas within the blue buffer area be allowed the up to 6, and then those few outlying areas would the minimum 4 would apply to.
So just for clarification, and I know lots of people will be wondering this. So what impact will this have on infill lots in Forest Crown or Sullivan Landing, or what are traditionally the single family neighborhoods?
Yeah, so well, in both of those specific examples and in others, some of the changes have already taken effect with the housing availability and affordability changes. So if a property is zoned R1, for example, it's already got the options to do up to 3 units on it under the housing availability amendments. Under this concept, it would be at least 4 units by mandate from the province, and we're suggesting that to make it consistent with the R2 zone, that they be up to the 6 units.
Okay.
Right.
Thanks, Troy.
One thing we're finding in some of the new development areas is the developers are restricting by covenant the level of development that can occur on a parcel. So presently that's something that's not like the zoning may say up to 4, up to 6, but if there's a restrictive covenant registered on title that prevents the purchaser from developing it with more than 1 or more than 2, then the owner is to be held to that like by the private law restrictive covenant.
Interesting.
So ours it would conflict with our zoning, but our zoning doesn't overrule what the covenant says.
Right. So the minimum provincial legislation allows for 4 units on up to 4 units.
Yeah, and I mean, you referenced the example of well, let me just put it this way, without saying specific developments or neighborhoods. If there's a parcel that's in a restricted zone, so an R1 zone, I mean, there's 17 other zones that are, or 16 other zones, I guess, I think it is, that are deemed a restricted zone, so they limit the potential for housing right now. It by mandate, if it's larger than 280 square meters and serviced, then it would be mandatory up to a minimum 4 units.
Okay.
If it happens to be a smaller one, then it's mandatory minimum 3.
The devil will be in the details, undoubtedly. It's pretty complicated.
Well, one of the reasons why we're recommending we go this path is because we've council kind of crossed that bridge already with the housing availability and affordability amendments that applies to such a wide area of the community. And we think there's a strong rationale to just apply that consistently throughout the community.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Council, further comment? Go ahead, Councillor McGuire.
Yeah, I think either way we go on this, we're going to see a lot fewer zoning requests for residential developments. I don't see a lot of 5 plexes or 6 plexes going in at this point anyways, and even if we went with the number 3 option, it would mean far less zoning changes for residential developments coming through. So I'm open.
Go ahead, Troy.
If I just make another comment to that effect, and thank you, that was a good comment. We held the gentle density workshops, I guess a month ago or so now. And one of kind of a key learning, I think I mentioned that to council before, was it's likely that the 3 or 4 plex type development is kind of a sweet spot for that increased density on existing parcels. As soon as you go to 5 or 6 units, there's a number of kind of design and code requirements that sort of elevate some of the construction costs. So that kind of 3-plex, 4-plex, much easier to do, much cost efficient, I guess, to a certain degree. You kind of need to go well past, I guess, the 6 units in some degrees. But so anyway, yeah. So 3 or 4 is kind of a sweet spot that way. But those things may change, I guess, down the road too. Like that could be there could be some efficiencies found but I think as well, it's pretty easy to do 3, 4, even 5 or 6 units in roughly the same kind of scale of building that happens on a lot of those new development lots, right? So so from a scale and massing perspective, there's not a lot of change that way. Sure, there might be more units there, but from an overall kind of impact standpoint, it's not necessarily a major change. And frankly, that's how many communities were built decades ago. Was a lot more flexibility and mix of housing types and sizes within every neighborhood, and we've got many good examples of that in our own community.
Yeah, no, great point. I mean, this is, as we've seen with previous experience, I mean, it'll be 10 years before we start to see any appreciable impact from, what it is we're attempting to do here. As always, we'll see undoubtedly one or two. Everybody will get fussed about it, until it's finished, sees how it fits in with the neighborhoods. I know back in the 70s, that was the order of the day. Every new development that went in had a wide variety of uses, all the way from apartment blocks right down to single family homes. And it was called a community. And you had young people, old people, students, young families. It was a real good mix, and that's what this enables over time. So, all right, go ahead, Councillor Cairns.
Thank you. Thanks, Troy, for this. And I really like the approach of having that consistency of options throughout the community, and agree that, it takes a lot of time. It's complicated for people to undertake this, and not many are going to take it up. I completely agree with you, Mr. Mayor, in terms of having that mix of housing throughout the community. Some single family, some apartments, some multi-unit. It's a good, healthy mix to have. And yeah, I would support the recommended option.
All right, further? Last comments, council? Call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. Thanks for that, Troy. All right, next up, we have a bylaw for adoption, and that is for the zoning amendment for 725 300th Street. We've been through this a couple of times, and the motion on the floor is that council adopt the bylaw amendment. Councillor McGuire moves. Councillor Royer seconds. Any further discussion? All those in favor? That motion is carried. Okay, under new business, we have the Fire Department 2023 Annual Report. Thanks for being here tonight, Chief. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Glad to be here, Mr. Mayor. Thanks for having me. So this is my first report as chief of Kimberley. And I've mixed it up a little bit. Built up a little bit more into the previous reports. I'm not going to go through everything, but I will go over the, I believe, highlights of the actual report itself. In 2023, 187 initial inspections were done versus 244 in 2022. Just with reduced staffing levels and a focus on compliance, we saw a decrease in 2023. The department presented fire safety, prevention, and preparedness through various engagements, including block parties, hall tours, nonprofit societies, AGMs. Total number of engagements conducted in 2023 were 24. Highlights including the Business Fire Prevention Week open house that we saw with the department. In 2023, 6 fires were investigated and reported to the Office of the Fire Commissioner. Fuels management, the fire department completed 92.1 hectares of fuels treatment, including slash pile and thinning and follow-up burning of those slash piles. Staff responded to 179 incidents in 2023 versus 167 in 2022. Keeping with the trend over the last 5 years, we've seen around 180 to 167 incidents being responded to by the fire department. In 2023, 11 members completed their 1001 evaluations testing. We're still working towards our hazmat operations to receive NFPA 1001 certification, which encompasses that full service rating under FUS. In 2023, we received the new engine. So we'll be working with that for the next 20 years as our frontline engine. And then I have the FUS underwriters rating classifications that the city is under. I won't dive too much to depth unless council has any questions on that. But that'll be the report going forward to council. Looking for you to receive it as information.
Awesome. Thanks, Chief. Councillor McBain, go ahead.
Thanks, Chief, for the report. On page 10, you've broken out all the response types. Really super helpful. I guess what I would ask, Will, is so we've got, you know, you got automatic alarm and what was the other? Oh, and false alarm. So those are 55 incidents right there where, you know, we can kind of imply that maybe not really much happened on an automatic, you know, not to say that it couldn't happen, but what number that jumped out at me was the ambulance assist. And I assume that this is kind of related to like first response type of calls.
Yeah, you could say they're somewhat synonymous. We would be dispatched automatically in the sense of a first response call if we provided that service. But right now it's ambulance service going to the call and then requesting us to attend.
Okay.
So that's the main difference between the two.
Okay. Is there any that you guys have to do where, you know, maybe they, sorry for the follow up,
Go ahead.
where they couldn't get to that you guys kind of had to fill in with them? Like if they were off on another call and another call came in, would you guys be kind of the next in line?
With the fire bylaw, I would say no with how it's worded right now on our provided services or services we should be providing. But we've had, and I can speak to this within the last 4 months, we've had an overdose call in or come in, sorry, where a student had overdosed on a particular narcotic, and the ambulance was out of town, and we would go to assist them. So that would be making sure the patient continue breathing, but no effective drugs to be administered on our end, and no ambulance in the municipality.
Right. So I guess what I'm trying to point out there, the reality suggests that you guys, you know, are called to those calls probably more maybe than, you know, you to be equipped to be, or at least what is stated within, you know, I guess you guys' description of service. So would you characterize that as there's some potential gaps in coverage there? I mean, it sounds like there could be, right? Like if we've got a call or an ambulance out somewhere else and you guys have to fill in, it seems to be like a gap to me.
Absolutely can be considered a gap. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, it's just, if I may,
Go ahead.
indulge me a little bit more here. It seems to me like it would be of interest to us to look into that a little bit further, Chief, I know you're a busy man, but I think it would help us understand and maybe some other services as well, where those gaps exist and, you know, maybe where we can fill some of those holes. So I would appreciate a little bit more understanding on that and maybe some potential ideas for remedying that, if that's something that we could have in the future.
I do believe it's something that should have some consideration looked at, and outside of myself. I think a delegate coming in from BCHS would be highly supportive of this, just for council and mayor to listen to, and just take that in from the actual ambulance services model. So,
and my last point there, and the reason I'm kind of bringing that up is, you know, we hear from our local sergeant, and you know, all you have to do is just read the news and you drive down to Kramik and really anywhere right now, and there's a crisis going on right now, and you know, it's taking a kind of an all hands approach, and you certainly don't want our community to be shorthanded when we're trying to, you know, potentially deal with saving somebody's life. So I appreciate that, Will.
Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, Will, my dad was a call rank fireman. Growing up, we had safety first, everything, even how you polished your shoes. I just am taken aback by the inspections. 110 inspections and 82 failures.
Mhm.
That just blows me away. Are people just not paying any attention to the need for the safety of the fire safety issues? And if so, I thank goodness you're pointing it out. What are your thoughts on that?
No,
Page 6.
thanks for pointing this out. We did purchase new inspection program where we can actually track the violations and the follow-ups that have to happen because of these violations. So anytime we do end up writing down violation, there's a mandatory follow-up on the department side. And not to say that things are being missed often or this is a trend or anything like that. We've never tracked this previously. We're just going to be starting to see, hey, these are the trends moving forward. And often sometimes it's just a commercial business needs that reminder, hey, your fire extinguisher is in fact expired and requires testing. So it's that reminder, we educate, and that is what the prevention program is there for. Your exit light sign is out. They might not have noticed. So it's us going in and doing that friendly reminder, educating why we do it, and then we'll be seeing the trend in the next 5 years of, hey, these are the violations, these are the frequent flyers. So
Yeah, so further to that, Will, the thing for me is that after that first inspection, regardless of the number of pass fail, the re-inspections were overwhelmingly failing. So in other words, they hadn't done anything about it in the first place. Is that basically what that says?
I don't know what the secondary fail rate was. I don't think the actual inspection breaks it down on that. So the re-inspection itself, we should be finding compliance afterwards. And then if we aren't finding compliance, we're actually upgrading, and we haven't had to do that yet. So we're finding often getting that compliance within two inspections. So
Okay, and what's the consequence of not taking action?
Uh,
At what point is there a consequence?
So it is dependent on who is doing the inspection, but the bylaw itself on the third inspection, we can actually start billing back under the fire service bylaw at $100 per inspection.
Okay.
That being said, we find education works a lot more than actually trying to fine in that sense. And then as well, we can upgrade to the OFC right now. And have them support us, but that actually is a cumbersome process where we have to exhaust all processes to actually bring them in and support us on that end.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Roy.
Well, this is interesting that we're all talking about something that's important like that. So I'm curious, does every house have a carbon monoxide detector attached to their smoke detector?
I don't think so at this time. I would recommend it. I would always recommend superseding the building code or anything else like that just for fire prevention and safety. But I don't think so. But we do have the senior smoke detector program in service right now. So anyone that basically calls looking for assistance with their smoke detectors will come replace batteries and replace actually smoke and carbon monoxide detectors just to support the city.
At this point, it's not a bylaw.
No.
It's optional.
It would fall under building code at certain points, but residential, I don't believe
Not yet.
falls under there.
So everybody who's watching YouTube, get a carbon monoxide regardless.
Absolutely.
Well,
Councillor Dunneback.
Thanks for the report, Chief. It's great to see all of these numbers where we can actually see what's going on with the fire department as it grows. I have a couple concerns regarding what the training is around EV fire and also the parking of EVs and underground parking and stuff like that. Up at the ski hill. If there's a plan in place for that, and also my biggest concern is employees going to, say, an extrication in a Tesla where there's a possibility of high voltage electrocution. So I'm just wondering if there's any courses being offered to the new and existing staff.
Yeah, I know. It is a hot topic at the fire department right now. Electric vehicles, we'll continue to see them in the news, good or bad on that end of it. Very volatile when in an accident or anything going wrong. Right now, if the best practice, and I don't know if council will like hearing this, but it is to let it burn if it won't impact any exposures outside that. And that means it will burn and not reignite afterwards. We have that thermal runaway that happens with lithium batteries. But on that end of it too, we're also looking at purchasing a blanket to actually mitigate that fire if it has exposures around it. We do provide electric vehicle training in the fire department itself. We have a new training platform that we purchased where they have in-depth training specifically to electric vehicle fires. We brought in external trainers to help support road rescue, and then EV is a portion of that as well too, to get that hands-on. We have field guides that we've downloaded to show our staff where the cutting points are on these vehicles and where the wiring harnesses are and what to stay away from. Tesla, Ford, all the suppliers make these programs and videos for firefighter safety, and we definitely implement them and use them throughout the department. Going to underground parking, again, I don't have an answer for this yet. We're hoping building code eventually will have some sort of upgrade, or the fire chiefs will come with best practices for us to implement. But we're watching what's going around, and we'll follow suit with what best practices are around that.
So that will appreciate it.
Okay, let's put a motion on the floor that we receive the report. Councillor McGuire, thank you. Seconded, Councillor McBain. All those in favor? Motion is carried. Thanks, Chief.
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah,
just while we have Chief Booth
you gotta
here,
put your hand up.
may I ask a
Go ahead.
question? I just while we have Chief Booth here, I just wanted to check in because we don't have the opportunity very often. So I just wanted to check in around this coming season and just some sense of the community wildfire resilience plan and what we might be looking at in terms of kind of unfolding that going forward, both to council and the community.
The CWRP, or the Community Wildfire Resilience Plan, it's being worked on by a consultant right now. We're about probably a month out, maybe a month and a half out. We've received the preliminary draft on that. It's gone to BCWS, and they've come back with some notes. So depending on how it comes back from our consultant, will depend on how it's disseminated, I think. The council, I think, will need to report on it at a minimum, just to express what the actual document will say and what it means for Kimberley itself. And then it'll be uploaded to the fire department's piece of the website on the city for residents as well, and then brought out with the open house at a minimum, I should say, all of this. But right now, I don't have full answers for you on what it is and how it's going to be disseminated right now.
Thank you. Can I further to that?
This question, we got to move on.
When is the open house usually scheduled?
It's been primarily around late April. I'm still aiming for that right now, and when I do set a date, I'll put it out on the social media so everybody's able to share it. But tentatively, we'll look to late April till early May right now.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Appreciate that. Okay, next item is the 2024 FCM Annual Conference attendee. Actually, no, you can't until after the meeting is over, and we will have a question period. Thank you. The recommendation on the floor is that council authorize myself, Councillor Royer, and Councillor Cairns to attend FCM in Calgary from June 6th to June 9th. Councillor McGuire moves. Councillor McBain seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. Pardon me. Next up, we have the city check run in the amount of $883,753 to be approved as paid. Mover, please. Councillor Roberts moves. Councillor McBain seconds. Any non-routines anybody wants to point out? Go ahead, Sandra.
One large payment, this time going to the people that are building the gymnasium, which is coming along quite nicely, it seems. $390,000 there to getting caught up.
All right, awesome. Thank you. Call the question. All those in favor? That motion is carried. Okay, question period. We were 30 seconds away. Oh, pardon me. We do have an item of correspondence to receive. Just one second. Thank you, Councillor McBain. Councillor Royer seconds. All those in favor? Motion is carried. Okay. Do we have a mover?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was what.
You moved for receipt. Yeah. So we need a motion for the letter of support. Councillor McGuire moves letter of support. Councillor McBain seconds. All those in favor? That motion is carried. Sorry about that. Anxious to get to question period. So go ahead.
My name is Brian White, a resident of Kimberley. About 3-4 years ago, I noticed a lot of piles of debris, I guess, cleaned up from the forest floor in various parts of Kimberley and on the outskirts of it around the road. Some of them are smaller and some of them are the height of a man and are taller than men. They're nice and dry. You can call them just pretty well accelerator fire, piles. If there's a forest fire that comes through this town, or it starts, or whatever like that, that puts buildings in danger and so on like that. Not to mention all the tourists coming through town, seeing this year after year, they haven't been cleaned up. I've approached the fire department 3 times, and I've been told that they're waiting for the proper conditions in the spring or fall to burn them. That doesn't seem to have happened in 3 years that I've seen. And I've mentioned maybe you should go to a plan B, haul the stuff out, chip it, put it in the back of dump trucks and take it away. Not as a nice one, but it's a danger. And we've all seen on TV, even St. Mary's, what happens when a forest fire gets away. And Kimberley is surrounded by forest. It is not immune to this sort of catastrophe that could come along.
Thanks.
These piles shouldn't be here past the spring. They should be gone.
Can I get a
They're
clarif-
a danger to this community.
Thank you for the question, Brian.
Can I get a clarification? What street? Sorry, I couldn't hear it very well. Sorry. Which area were you talking?
Okay, I counted 116 of them in 3 areas.
Yeah, I think the chief knows what we're talking about.
There's about 60 of them between here and Marysville. All you got to do is drive up the hospital and you'll see them right on the side of the road. They're in pathways. Some of these piles are fairly big and they're in amongst the trees. So burning them, I kind of see the doubtful of that. People will complain about it. And there's a bunch up on the west side of the west stairs.
Thanks, Brian. So let's let the chief answer. Go ahead, Will. It's not the first time we've heard.
No,
slash piles.
I appreciate every comment and every question that comes in about slash pile burning and everything else that happens within the town. Yeah, some haven't been completed yet. a lot of the ones that haven't been completed are located on pretty steep hillsides. When we were burning this year, we were trying to avoid any rolling of logs or anything in that nature. So any broadcasting of fire we knew we were being watched at this point by the public. We still have intention to come back and burn these piles with the increased snow load to prevent any rolling of these logs. And we will need snow melt. We had slash piles that continue to burn for several days and weeks post ignition. And I will point out that we did complete 23.1 hectares of slash pile burning this year. So 23.1 hectares have been completed in 2023, but not everything has been completed yet. It's an ongoing process. We have we have a delayed burning process of the piles for several reasons, but we're still looking to complete.
Thank you, Will.
The city.
Volunteers to help haul it down, chip it, take it away. It becomes a long bonus of the fire. Game that's seeing the summer's getting hotter. We've got a much bigger out. That this will help just moving property around the city. When the thing that happens after last year, it's should be great.
Thank you, Brian. Point taken. Okay, motion to move in camera. Councillor Dunneback, thank you. Councillor McGuire seconds. All those in favor? That motion is carried. We'll take 2 minutes and then in camera. What's that? Krav.